Beginning in the year 2025, the White House shocked the country with unexpected statement from President Donald aiming at Canadian imports. Trump facing a heavy levy of 25%. The official explanation worries regarding the border safety, unlawful immigration, and pharmaceutical. The word quickly spread about the smuggling. Cause: a swift ruckus across. Companies owned by Canadian government authorities. Leaders and everyday citizens found themselves asking the same question. How should Canada reply? Some pushed for harsh retaliation, stating that Canada shouldn't sit back while its top trading partner tightened the screws. Others cautioned that rising tensions might backfire, potentially harming Canadian businesses and workers. Yet one thing was obvious: Canada was not going to take this lightly. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made it clear. Canada wouldn't take this sitting down. Everything is on the table, he cautioned, calling for a united front. Simultaneously, on Premier, Doug Ford took it a step farther, floated the idea of banning American liquor imports and even reducing energy shipments to states like Michigan and New York. Now here's where things get difficult. The US and Canadian economies are like tangled. Wires pluck one, and the entire system might short-circuit. A big chunk of American refineries, especially in the Midwest and Rocky Mountains, rely on heavy crude from Canada. If Canada were to tighten its oil supplies, gas prices in the US might skyrocket, and back in Canada, oil rich provinces could take a serious economic blow. But that's not the only energy drama occurring over in Asia. China has been making substantial shifts in its oil game. US crude exports to China have taken a nosedive, plummeting from 115.6 million barrels last year to only 81.9 million barrels. Why? A mix of variables: China's faltering economy, a push for renewable energy, and an increasing desire for oil from Russia and Iran. And Beijing isn't just walking away. Silently, in direct response to US tariffs, China hit back with its own list of sanctions, hitting American energy products with new taxes commencing February 10, 2025. US crude oil will suffer a 10% tariff, while liquefied natural gas, LNG, and coal will be slapped with a 15% tariff. This change signals a significant tipping moment in global energy politics. Once the second greatest buyer of US oil, China has now dropped down to sixth place. That's not just a small shuffle. It's a major readjustment that might change the way oil moves around the world for years. China has been the world's largest oil importer, drawing in millions of barrels every day to fuel its enormous economy. But things are moving. Recent studies show that China's overall crude imports have actually fallen by around 7.2% compared to last year. Why? A combination of elements: lasting repercussions from COVID-19 lockdowns, well-stocked domestic reserves, and plans to modernize refineries. So here's the twist. Even with this drop, China has been quietly altering its buying approach to get better deals and more control over its energy supply. Government customs data implies a notable shift in who China is buying from. Instead of relying as much on conventional Western suppliers, Beijing is going more toward cheaper and politically isolated sources like Russia, Iran, and Venezuela. And the statistics back things up. According to energy tracking firms, similar Kepler, China's imports from these sanctioned nations are creeping up. A 2% rise in shipments from Iran, for example, might sound trivial, yet when you're importing over 10 million barrels a day, that's a big amount of oil. So, why the change? Simple: money and strategy. Ever since Russia was attacked with Western sanctions, it's been unloading oil at huge discounts. China, always looking for a discount, has taken full advantage, scooping up Russian Ural soil at prices much below market rates. Iran, facing US sanctions, has also found a means to keep its oil flowing to China, just not in a traditional method. Instead of shipping oil straight, Iranian vessels often switch off their tracking systems, transfer crude to other ships at sea, notably near Malaysia. and then resume their journey under a different identification. By the time the oil reaches China, it's classified as coming from a separate country maybe. Malaysia occasionally. Oman, Venezuela, which has been suffering harsh US sanctions for years, plays a comparable game even with limits in location. Its oil still finds a way into China through sophisticated payment methods and third-party traders. Since Venezuelan crude is often significantly cheaper than other sources, smaller Chinese refineries, especially those outside government authority, are more than happy to buy it. China's energy strategy isn't merely about getting cheap oil. It's about long-term security by extending its purchases among multiple vendors, including those outside the influence of the US and Europe. China minimizes the risk of relying too much on any single country. And there's additional advantage: buying oil at a discount allows Chinese refiners to operate with better profits. That implies they can either sell fuel at lower prices locally or flood the market with cheap refined items, especially in Asia, further increasing their economic grasp on the region. Following these covert oil trades isn't easy, yet analysts have ways of revealing what's actually going on. Firms like Kaler and Vortex use satellite photos, ship tracking data, and port records to follow oil ships in real time. One frequent tactic: some tanks shied from radar by turning off their tracking systems, something known as turning dark. Others conduct ship-to-ship transfers in the middle of the ocean to disguise where the oil originally originated from. Ports in Malaysia and Oman have become hotspots for these deals, enabling Iranian and Venezuelan crude will be relabeled before heading to China. Even if Chinese customs records might not officially show these barrels coming from sanctioned countries, the increase in shipments tells a different narrative. It's clear that China is purposefully tapping into these cheaper sources, saving billions of dollars and changing global oil flows in the procedure. China's growing hunger for cheap oil isn't just damaging its own economy, it's spreading tremors across the full global energy market. Traditional suppliers like Saudi Arabia, Angola, and Brazil are feeling the pressure, sometimes even changing their official pricing structures only to stay competitive. This new reality has compelled big oil producers should rethink their price methods, with China securing substantially discounted supplies from sanctioned nations like Russia, Iran, and Venezuela. Western efforts to restrain these oil flows are being put to the test, and China continues to focus affordability over traditional partnerships. It's starting to play a larger role in setting global oil prices. For Russia, China's shifting oil priorities have been both a challenge, having an opportunity after facing waves of sanctions following its invasion of Ukraine. Russia directed its focus toward Asia, particularly China. This action wasn't just about surviving. It was a total revision of their energy strategy by facing significant discounts on its crude. Russia quickly became one of China's go-to suppliers in 2023. A loan trade between the two nations climbed beyond $240 billion, with oil and gas accounting up a big chunk of that sum. But Russia didn't stop there. In 2024, China finished the Power of Siberia pipeline, giving it a direct path to Russian natural gas, and currently, conversations are efforts to expand those supplies through the anticipated Power of Siberia 2 pipeline, which would redirect gas that was initially meant for Europe. This change has fundamentally affected global energy transfers, with Russia becoming increasingly dependent on China to absorb its exports, and for Beijing, securing a long-term energy supply from Russia helps lessen its reliance on Western-controlled markets. China's energy strategy isn't only about getting the best pricing, it's also about creating alliances that serve its long-term interests. And nowhere is that more evident than in his interactions with Iran. Despite sanctions intended at cutting off trans-oil revenue, China has remained a steady customer, often purchasing Iranian crude at rock-low prices. These deals don't merely provide China inexpensive energy. They also act as a financial lifeline for Iran, aiding its subsidized critical government initiatives such military projects. Washington hasn't turned a blind eye to this. In October 2024, the U.S. rolled down even stricter sanctions targeting Iran's oil and petrochemical industries, expecting to crush Tehran's economy. But so far, China hasn't backed down. Instead, it's continuing to discover ways to silently introduce an Iranian oil, sometimes by masking packages or routing them through third parties, while China's oil trading with Russia and Iran captures attention. Its energy relationship with the United Arab Emirates (UAE) has similarly been increasing at a fast pace. By 2023, commerce between China and the UAE had risen to about 95 of that total, with non-oil goods still remains at the heart of their connection. The UAE's natural gas exports to China reached over $4 billion that year, supporting Beijing's strategy of diversifying its energy sources. And it's not only about buying and selling oil under China's Belt and Road Initiative. State-owned China National Petroleum Corporation, CNPC, has deepened collaboration with the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. Not these joint ventures aren't only about acquiring more oil, they're about embedding China more thoroughly into the worldwide energy system. In mid-2024, China's state-owned energy giant CN inked a key arrangement with the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. The collaboration focused on developing new oil and gas reserves, ramping up production, and boosting the trade of crude oil and liquefied natural gas, LNG. This arrangement isn't simply about business. It represents both nations' desire to enhance their energy links for the long haul. But it's not just fossil fuels that are on their radar. Both China and the UAE have been lobbying for a greener future, pouring investments into green energy. China, already a leader. Nowadays, solar technology has been exporting enormous quantity of solar panels to the Middle East, helps the UAE accomplish its renewable energy targets. Economic ties between the two countries are also tightening. China has been the UAE's top trading partner for years, while the UAE has become China's second-largest commercial ally in the Middle East. Investments are rising on both sides. Chinese investments in the UAE increased by 16% last year, surpassing $1.3 billion, while UAE investments in China surged by 120%, making up over 90% of all Arab capitals streaming into China. China's increasing partnerships with Russia and Iran might have a big impact on its demand for American energy. With access to cheaper oil from these politically isolated suppliers, China has fewer reasons to buy from the US, and it's not merely about price. This move is also component of a broader strategy to minimize dependency on Western-controlled markets. Beyond oil, China's connection with Russia and Iran extends into diplomacy and trade. These ties match with China's broader Belt and Road program, a worldwide infrastructure project intended developed to expand Beijing's impact across various continents. Strengthening energy ties with nations outside Western impact is just another step in securing its economic independence. If China continues to scale back its oil purchases from the US, it might have ripple impacts across the American energy industry. Decreasing demand means negative pressure on crude price, potentially decreasing revenues for US oil producers that in turn could delay down investment, affect job creation, and even change long-term economic forecasts for the industry. At the same time, the continuous trade tensions between the US and China have only prompted Beijing to seek alternatives with tariffs and trade limits, making American energy less beautiful. China has been steadily lowering its reliance on US oil. This change doesn't simply hurt oil firms, it might also worsen the US trade deficit and affect important economic indicators. China's journey as the world's biggest oil importer reflects the country's rapid industrialization and ever-changing energy strategies. Using daily crude imports surpassing 10 million barrels, China has long shaped global oil demand. But as it diversifies its sources, secures cheaper alternatives, and invests in renewable energy, The balance of power in global energy markets is shifting in. The early 1990s, China reached a big turning point in its energy history. After decades of being self-sufficient, the country found itself consuming more oil than it could produce by 1993. Domestic fields, like Ding, merely couldn't keep up with the country's growing industries, and for the first time China had to start importing oil to fulfill demand. At first it went to nearby suppliers in Southeast Asia, because that was simply the beginning, as China's economy surged in the 2000s, spurred by its entrance into the World Trade Organization (WTO) and enormous investments in manufacturing and infrastructure. Oil imports surged by the end of the decade. China was bringing in over 4 million barrels of crude every single day to handle this surge. China rapidly extended its pipeline networks and refining capacity, ensuring it could process significantly higher amounts of crude. And it paid off. By 2017. China overtook the United States as the world's #1 oil importer. Instead of depending largely on the Middle East, it began diversifying, ratcheting up purchases from Russia and Africa. By the late 2010, China was importing almost 10 million barrels of oil every day, reinforcing its dominance in global energy markets. Even when COVID-19 upended global supply networks in 2020, China didn't slam the brakes. Taking advantage of dropping oil prices, it set up vast reserves, ensuring a consistent supply. By 2023, as its economy bounced back, China was importing a record 11.3 million barrels per day. China's approach to energy isn't just about ensuring enough oil, it's about playing the long game. And that entails considering who it buys from, instead of depending on us crude. China has been shifting its focus toward its BRICS allies, particularly Russia and Iran. This isn't simply about finding cheaper oil. It's a deliberate move to lessen dependence on American-controlled markets. Western sanctions on Russia following the Ukraine conflict offered up a new possibility for China: access to Russian oil at substantial discounts. At the same time, Iran, long under its embargoes, offered China an alternate supply source, substantially diversifying its energy imports by reducing back on US oil. China is doing more than merely saving money. It's also shielding itself from trade pressures and possible sanctions. And there's another twist. Many of these oil transactions are now being conducted in non-dollar currency, threatening the long-standing dominance of the petrodollar system. China's pullback from US crude isn't simply an economic transition, it's a geopolitical power move. If China keeps scaling back its American oil purchases, it could lead to a supply surplus in the US market. That might sound like a good idea for consumers, but for producers, it's a different narrative. Reduced demand might push prices down, reducing profit margins, discouraging new investments, and even slashing employment across the energy sector. And that's just the beginning. By establishing energy bonds using BRICS countries, China is helping create an economic bloc that operates outside of US influence that could weaken Washington's leverage in global energy markets and diminish the efficacy of sanctions as a political tool. Theirs. But the potential risk to the US trade balance, with petroleum being a main shipment to China, a continuous drop in purchases might worsen the trade deficit, putting extra strain on an already the economic relationship between the two superpowers.